Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last session of Sharp 315, Research Ethics and Responsible Conduct of Research for this year. This is the culmination, if you wish, of the course. You will be presenting very interesting presentations. I had a chance to see them yesterday. And after that, we will all be ready to take the scientist pledge. Before we start, a big thank you to all my colleagues and to Rima, to Ali, for everyone in making this a success. And yalla, let's buckle up.
أهلا تفضلوا.
مرحبا حكيم.
مرحبا حكيم.
أهلا وسهلا مستر مدام راس، كيف صحتكم؟ مين جايبين لي معكم اليوم؟
جايبين جميل مثل ما بتعرف يا حكيم، من كم يوم رحنا على الطوارئ لأنه صار معه انتكاسة.
مزبوط، انتكاسة بشو؟
كبر راسه كتير.
خلوني افتح الملف تبعه. مزبوط عنده هيدا الشيء اللي اسمه بيج ايجو سيندروم.
طيب وشو فينا نعمل له يا حكيم؟
والله جيتوا بوقتكم. هلا عم بعمل دراسة مع زملائي بأمريكا على دواء جديد اسمه همبل بيلز. أنا برأيي هيدا الحل الوحيد، لازم تفوتوا بهاي الدراسة.
همبل بيلز؟
خلوني اروح اجيب الأوراق وخليكم تحكوا بالموضوع، تتشاوروا عبال ما كنت رح جبت الأوراق عن الدراسة.
شو رأيك؟ بنفوت جميل بالدراسة؟ بس أنا خايفانة عتلانة هم يصير معه شيء، بركي تضرر عليهم هول البيلز.
ما فينا نزعل الحكيم، أنا عندي ثقة فيه، هو بيحكمه لجميل ورح يحكمه لعدة سنين، وبيحكموا أخواته كمان، ما فينا نزعله.
بس أنا خايفانة بركي ما استفاد، بركي تضرر. مش مرتاحة أنا لهالدراسة.
يلا أنا جيت فكرتوا جبت لكم الأوراق عن هيدا الدواء الهمبل بيلز. شو عندكم أسئلة لحد هلا؟
يا حكيم أنا بصراحة كتير عتلانة هم، بركي صار معه شيء، بركي تضرر، هيدا بعده ولد والتأثير حيكون عليه مدى حياته.
لا مدام، ما يكون لك فكر، هيدا الدواء عم يتجرب بأمريكا بأحسن مراكز، ما حدا عم بيصير معه شيء.
طيب ولنفترض صار معه شيء وبده يتعالج، مين بيغطيه؟ مين بيدفع له؟
ما تعتلي هم ابدا، ما عنده انشورنس، هو عنده تأمين بيدفع له.
بس التأمين ما بيدفع إذا هو خلق ما مشكلة صحية.
بلا وزارة الصحة بتغطيه، ما تعتلوا هم.
اوكي أنا موافق.
بس أنا بعد مش موافقة.
طيب خلونا ناخد رأي جميل. شو رأيه جميل؟
لا شو بدنا برأي جميل، أنا بعرف مصلحته، هو بعده صغير.
طيب ما زال هيك، تفضلوا امضي مسيو، تفضل امضي الورقة.
Everyone take a bow.
Thank you very much. I can tell why you enjoyed it, Doctora. Since I met everyone more than once, some of them or most of them, I'm going to leave the questions to my colleagues, okay? And of course, after my colleagues raise any questions if they have, we're going to move to questions from the audience and then to group 2. كنت عم بحكي did you hear me or it was on mute?
No, we heard you.
Okay.
May I start with a question?
ولو you are the maestro غادة.
This is very enjoyable. Thank you so much. I haven't been following track closely as much of all of you have, but the consent of both parents is important by Lebanese law with assent of the child. Is this applicable in all countries to the best of your understanding?
Are you asking us?
Yes.
Lama Group 1, yes. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Natalie, Sarah, you can jump in.
So
anytime.
Ghada, when you say in all countries, what do you mean all countries? Western, Arab, or
Yes,
globally?
yes. You know, I mean, is this applicable worldwide, or are they countries where the father alone or the mother alone could consent and the child assent? This was my question.
Okay, so if I may highlight one thing, there are times when in different cultures, really it is the father who makes that decision. And even by Lebanese law, usually the one who really makes the decision is the dad, but عرفياً يعني, it's now we are going to both parents consenting. And when there's a problem, we need to solve the problem between them. But most importantly, by law is one thing, by ethics it's another. So legally it might be the father, but ethically it's not only the father. So we make sure we have both opinions. So we join law and ethics.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to highlight. And Talia, can you briefly tell us in the US and in Europe what's usually done? Is it both parents? Because my understanding, it's not necessarily both parents. Not ethically, I'm talking by law now.
Yes, it's not necessarily both parents, and it's even a little bit more complicated because at times you have emancipated minors, that's one. You have the people living with the mom, yani, for example, the husband living with the mom who can also consent, not necessarily the father. So no, it's not as simple as we are.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight. Thanks so much.
Can I ask a question to the group?
Can I say something? May I say something? So yeah, maybe it's not legally binding, but verbally we usually prefer to take the consent of both parents.
Definitely, particularly in AUB, because we have managed, alhamdulillah, to join law and ethics. Absolutely, thank you.
Yes.
Debbie, you want to
yes, thank you. That was a really, really nice illustration of some of the issues. So regarding consent for children and research, can you tell us a little bit about weighing up the risks and benefits for children participating in research and how you would weigh those up for a child who is healthy versus a child with a medical condition?
Natalie, do you want to go for this? Because you raised those issues during our discussions.
Yes, I will. So the risks, so we tried to highlight, I don't think it was, maybe it could have been clear, but we were talking about how any risks that, or any side effects or adverse events that would be inflicted on the child would have to live with for a prolonged period of time. So for an adult, say would have a shorter life with which they would have to, well, there would be a shorter duration of their life with which they would have to deal with those adverse events. So as you've compared it with a child with a chronic condition versus, I guess it has to depend on the child's, at baseline, their life expectancy with this condition. If it was a short life expectancy either way, then trying perhaps they wouldn't have had to live with these adverse events to begin with for a very long time. And obviously the benefits would be greater than the risks because they are already not in a very good state. However, if they were a healthy child, then yes, you would have to deal with, you would have to weigh them more, because the risks that you might have specifically with certain studies or certain things we don't see immediately within the study. So it could be something even after the study duration, the child would have these adverse events appear 10 or 15 years later. So we don't really know. That answers your question, or it was more of a discussion.
Sarah, do you want to add something before I add my couple of words?
Yes, thank you, doctor. So the thing is here, we have to look at if there are other alternatives. So if we're looking at some condition that is not treatable yet, and there's a trial going on, and a possible treatment. So the risks may be high, but there are also no other alternatives. So the benefit here may also be relatively equal to the risk. But if there are other treatments that are available and they're effective and so on, why delve into some trial or some new medication that would not be essentially helpful and could have a lot of long-term risk, as Natalie highlighted?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends on the individual situation of the child. And when we're weighing up those risks and benefits, it's really weighing up what they would normally be at risk of and the side effects and toxicities of treatment that they would normally have. So for a healthy child, that's going to be more difficult. For a child who has a very severe medical condition, then we accept a little more risk for anticipated more benefit. So that's always something difficult to weigh up.
Absolutely. May I say something about children with conditions? Also, I'm thinking of children with disabilities. On one hand, it may not be ethical to involve them in research if they are not going to benefit. On the other hand, it is not ethical not to involve them in research even if they have this condition, if the research will benefit their condition. I hope I was clear. So not because they have a condition, they need to be excluded. That's my point.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyone from the Sharp 315 team, colleagues, students?
Dr. Talia, you asked the question about insurance. So it depends on the study, what it entails, and the risks of side effects. So if there are risks, then yes, the study should stipulate an insurance to cover for potential side effects. However, if the risks are really minimal, maybe it's not necessary to have such an insurance.
And Lebanese law, according to what we know, it's mandatory بكل studies يكون في insurance. حتى يبي عندها funds that would provide it in case such a thing.
So thank you, Antoine. I wanted to bring this up. There was a debate a few years ago between the IRBs all over and the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health back then, under the leadership of Dr. Walid Ammar, insisted that all research participants have insurance. And so, there is cost and benefit here. There you go. Someone said yes. Okay, Deborah. Right. That's it. Thank you. We move on.
Okay, so now we have group 2 and research in conflict areas.
Hello, everyone. This is Rachel and Christian, and today we're going to discuss research in conflict areas. So why do we need research in conflict areas? We need it in order to improve knowledge of health interventions and generate knowledge that we are able to study and generalize, to be able to emphasize and highlight the predicaments of the inhabitants that are caught in these conflicts, and to determine the aspects in these conflict areas that decrease the quality of life and hinder everyday life. And eventually, we want to aid these individuals in such areas, and we want to decrease the burden of conflict on their everyday lives, and to be able to provide a better understanding of what they are passing through.
So what are some limitations you might encounter in these areas? You might encounter political pressure on how to conduct your research or disseminate your findings. You might find yourself unable to report some abuses of human rights. You might find that there is no data collection system in the area, and your statistical measures may not be enough to actually capture the full vision that you are seeing in front of you. There might be some political instability and insecurity. The displacement of populations might be a challenge in perspective and studies that require follow-ups, and this may make some unpredictability in how you conduct your study. You might find a conflict of duties between the researcher and the individual who is delivering medical care to these individuals. You might find, and most probably will find, difficulty acquiring informed consent from the vulnerable participants that you are dealing with. So in some areas, you might be compelled to find that there is no ethical research review board or a committee, and you might disregard some of the most basic rules, but always remember, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, and always seek approval from probably other review boards, from the individuals you are interviewing, and you might be extra aware of how you approach sensitive topics. So we will delve into some issues in details, and we will give you some tips on how to navigate them.
So let's discuss now psychiatric support. It's very important in these areas of conflict that to seek psychiatric help and look for psychiatric support, because the individuals in these areas are vulnerable due to physical, mental distress, and deliberate targeting. They might also be subject to multiple human rights abuses and to invasion of privacy. It's not easy to ask such individuals about situations due to the fact that it might bring up back repressed memories, it might lead to open wounds, and it might lead to PTSD, for example. And maybe in some cases, these individuals might be rape victims and victims of sexual violence. And the researcher should be very keen on being very sensitive to such individuals and not to talk about certain aspects and certain topics. In addition, the individuals that are being researched might be children, and as we know, children are very vulnerable. It's very hard to communicate with these children, and children can be scarred easily, and therefore the researcher should take extra care in talking to children and to be careful to what he's asking. Therefore, we recommend that a psychiatrist should always be on board, not only to provide psychiatric help and support to the individuals being questioned, but also help guide the researcher to what he or she could or could not ask, and to be very sensitive to what he is talking about.
So another issue is being outspoken about certain abuses and emergencies. Some individuals might not be allowed to stay in a certain area in case they speak up about something they see. From personal experience, I can tell you that a couple of years ago, I was working with a certain NGO, and we were working on a program to deliver a certain training to some educated refugees who might later on disperse this knowledge onto their friends, and will probably go on to train other refugees on the same topic. So while we were doing this training, I noticed that the individual who was in charge and he was our point of contact and who helped us organize this training, basically was taking financial compensation from the individuals and the trainees who were coming in. Now, I was very tempted to speak up, but I just sat down for a minute, took a step back, and noticed that if I were to speak up, this individual, our point of contact, we might basically expel us from the building we were in, from the room we were in, that he basically had booked for us. So I took a step back and thought that actually it might be more beneficial for me to give the training, because I noticed that the financial compensation was very small, and the benefits from the training might be even more important. Christian?
So let's discuss now the importance of informed consent. As we know, I'm not going to define informed consent. We've gone through it extensively in the ethics course. It's very important that the informed consent contains the individual's right to withdraw from the actual study without affecting the delivery of care. Not to answer some questions, the person might want to stay anonymous and use the responses given as general information by the researcher, and the individual who is being interviewed might want to have the chance to read and go over the actual text that is attributed to him. Some complications during informed consent in such areas might be the language. The actual individual being interviewed might speak different languages. It's very hard to communicate with. The culture that might prevent a researcher from actually interviewing the individual. The educational level, definitely some individuals might be illiterate, might not be able to understand what the informed consent contains or what the actual contents mean. Social norms, for example, signing a paper might be dangerous and very serious. The individual might refrain from doing so. And let's not forget the vulnerable population and how to cater to their needs. And the informed consent should be able to discuss these vulnerable individuals and how to deal with them. Now, some quick solutions. We believe that the researcher should immerse himself into the situation, communicate with the residents, live with them a little bit, learn how they communicate, how they live, what they do, and build a mutual mutual relationship of respect between them to be able to interview them later on. The individual might want to bring a translator with them to be able to explain what the informed consent contains, or maybe use recorded pre-approved photos from the IRB to be able to communicate with these individuals. In addition, the healthy relationship, the collaboration, and the mutual respect should be there to be able to have a proper informed consent.
So
To conclude,
in conclusion, yeah, you might have to fine-tune or change your methodology while you're in this area. So always have a plan B, a plan C, plan D. You might have to anticipate how things will change when you're there. So this is why we always recommend to immerse yourself in the culture, in the area before you start writing your proposal. And even when you do, you might have to make some big changes when you arrive.
don't forget, you want to collaborate with local researchers, you might learn from them, and you might definitely teach them, and therefore make this whole experience worthy and better for everyone. And let's not forget the informed consent. It should be very clear what you're asking from the participant, and he should be able to understand very well what he's going into. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really surprised. How can you speak so quickly? That's amazing. All right,
it was really hard to limit.
So any questions from our colleagues?
Yes, a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. If you allow me to ask you one single question. In light of what you have mentioned in terms of the ethicalities of obtaining that informed consent under areas or in areas of conflict, how can you secure or how can you propose like a measurement on training the ones who are taking the informed consent to be as objective as possible? Because sometimes the affiliation or the political inclination of the one who is taking the informed consent himself or herself may really bias the participant. How do you think you can go over this?
Yes, doctor. Basically, we would make sure to train the individuals ahead of time to have a script approved by the IRB and make sure that everyone that is going to the area of conflict to conduct this research is very well trained on how to conduct this informed consent, and that he or she does not deviate from the script that we already have or the pictures or anything else. So, and I would also make sure that we have someone that would basically, I'm trying to formulate it, that would keep an eye on whoever is conducting the research or taking informed consent, just to make sure, at least for a while at the beginning, that everything is going according to plan.
Thank you.
Christian, would you like to add anything to that?
I wanted to add that the individual who is going to take the informed consent should actually spend a little bit of time with these individuals and understand how they are able to communicate and actually understand what he wants to ask them so he can deliver what he wants to deliver very clearly with no objectiveness. And with objectiveness, I mean, and he should, as you said, he should be observed, he should be trained, he should have script, and he should be able to deliver that script very fluently and very easily and not deviate from what he wants to say, just by knowing how to communicate with these individuals, because he actually lived with them and he actually communicated with them and is able to tell them what he wants to tell them.
So in all fairness, I have to admit that this topic is quite loaded. So I'm surprised you managed to present the most important issues. I have one point to comment on, and you probably said it and I missed it, when you talked about psychiatric assistance during the research. You said that we need to have someone to support the participants. We also definitely need someone to support the researchers at times who might be traumatized doing research in areas of conflict, who might be threatened, and etc. Am I right?
Yes, as we discussed in the video, maybe I spoke too quickly. It wasn't very clear. A psychiatrist is not only there to help the individuals we are going to interview, but also to help the researcher to guide him, to tell him, to help him out in the actual interview process, what he could ask, what he could not ask, maybe help the researcher himself. And therefore, the psychiatrist plays a double role in this case here. It's not only for the individual you are interviewing, but also for the researcher as a help, as a guide to the actual research process.
Thank you, Christian. Anyone else wants to raise a question or a comment?
If I could
I just
ask a
want to
question.
comment.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Debbie.
No, very quick one. Do you, to the team, do they think that all research done in countries where there is conflict should be approved by a local IRB or the local Ministry of Health? Or do you think it's fine for an IRB from, example, the UK to approve a study that's conducted in Lebanon with refugees, for example?
I think this is very dependent on the country itself where we're doing the research. So let's say in Lebanon, we do have ethical review boards, and maybe you might seek approval from both boards and present your proposal after being approved in the UK, let's say, present it to an ethical review board in Lebanon just to make sure that the laws and the regulations that are set in place here in this country are being followed throughout this research. But I do know that there are some places where we don't have ethical committees. So in this case, it would be a good idea to have approval from another country, from another board.
Yes, I believe as well, as Rachel said, there should be the local IRB and the international one should work hand in hand. Depends, as Rachel said, on the actual area where there is conflict. If there's an IRB board that could take on such a mission, it should coordinate with the international one together. They can come up with the actual guidelines. And if the area where you have conflict does not have an IRB, well, then the international one would have to do so.
Okay, good.
Maybe just the fact that the country is in conflict would be difficult to present a proposal to a country where it's already in torment.
Yes, definitely. It would be a challenge in that case.
So I think because we need to move on, I just want to highlight something very quickly, that when we're talking about IRB from abroad, so that makes up an international research, and this is another can of worms that we can discuss again. And for the sake of time, thank you very much. Shall we move on to the third presentation?
Yes, just one reminder for everyone that for the videos, it's 5 minutes, and then the total discussion along with the video is 15 minutes, so we'll try to keep it at that. Group 3, you sent a PowerPoint and a video. You'd like me to show the PowerPoint first? Yes, okay. يلا رزان.
Okay. So both of them have the same time limit, right? So we're not exceeding time.
Yeah, we're not exceeding time.
Okay.
Okay.
When I decided to conduct this social experiment of raising my kids in Lebanon, I never expected this much bad press. I mean, who would have thought in a country that has 4 seasons, in half an hour you can go from the beach to go skiing. We have hummus. وهون in our country يعني في احترام للمرأة. Yeah, so like I was saying, احترام للمرأة.
أنا ما كنت عارفة إنه بدي أنحرم من حقوقي، مش بس كمواطنة بس حقوقي كإنسان. ما كنت عارفة إنه مالي إذا وجعني راسي وما في بنادول وما عم لاقي، أصلاً بطل في دواء سيلان وبطل في دواء ضغط. اتس اوكي ما كنت عارفة رح يبطل في بنزين وإنه بتدبر راسك إذا بدك تروح على شغلك مجبور. أنا مثلاً كتير بحب روح على شغلي، هيك بقبض معاشي، بجيب خبز وحليب وشامبوان وبس هول هن. اتس اوكي إذا الطرقات منا مدوية بالليل وفي جوار وبطل في إشارات، إنه ماكسيموم تعمل أكسيدون. وإذا بالبيت ما في كهرباء وما في واي فاي وعندك درس او بدك تقدم عندك انترفيوز بدك تجرب تأمن مستقبلك وتهاجر، منك مضطر في كل شيء بلبنان.
انه I understand the criticisms after the experiment was done, but at the time when I did it in 1971, there was no Belmont report, now they speak to me of beneficence and justice to participants, and that wasn't available until 1979. So there was no standardized guidelines for how to conduct a proper experiment. And plus, I never expected this much psychological harm to come out of it. I mean, I knew that there was no proper infrastructure or healthcare system, but I mean, we did have the biggest plate of hummus.
هن قالوا هيك؟ هن حطوا الحق علينا؟ أنا بعرف أتصرف معهم. آخر همي إذا عم بيتعذبوا. آخر همي إذا ما في كهرباء بنزين أو طبابة. الحق مش علي ولا على فريق السياسي، هو البلد راكب هيك. نحن عم نعمل واجبنا بالنهاية. أكيد حقهم يتظاهروا وينزلوا على الشارع إذا بدهم. بس ما في شي حيتغير. إذا تخطوا حدودهم معنا أو علوا صوتهم نعرف كيف خليهم يدفعوا الثمن. بدهم يقبلوا بالوضع مثل ما هو لأنه ما خصني إنه خلقوا بلبنان.
Well, Elizabeth, I understand how hard and frustrating this must be. As we see here, the victim did not have the capacity to give consent, and the family did not have sufficient knowledge and comprehension about the unfortunate foreseen future. And what's more frustrating is that the victim cannot decline or withdraw at any point, and this is considered a violation of the Nuremberg Code. The victim was also subjected to an evident severe psychological burden, social harm, and extreme emotional trauma. And all of this could have been avoided. Actually, the defendant, by feeling the sense of empowerment, mistreated, humiliated, and threatened the victim. So they failed to avoid any harm to the victim, and again, this is considered a violation of the Nuremberg Code. Finally, the defendant lacked competence and enough awareness of their roles and responsibilities as politicians to protect the victim, but rather, they used their authority for personal gains at the expense of the victim's suffering.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to admit that from my side, the voice was not, the sound was not very clear, but I'm reassured that others managed to hear it very quickly. So I open the floor for questions.
Can I ask a question? For me, it wasn't very clear. I guess you need to explain to us. I understand that you are equating informed consent and research ethics with the current situation, but if you could just, one member of the group could just explain it really clearly to us, that would be great.
Hi, Doctor. I realize now in retrospect, we should have given a bit more background information on the topic. So our research topic was focused on Zimbardo's prison experiment, which highlighted problems in research ethics concerning lack of proper informed consent, as well as after this experiment was conducted, many guidelines had come out, including the Belmont report, seeking to maximize, beneficence and justice to research participants, which was not present at the time of the experiment. And this really raised issues relating to, the harm that this experiment caused on the participants at the time. So we were trying to equate lack of informed consent in that situation to lack of informed consent of being born in Lebanon. It was a bit of a creative stretch, but I hope given that background information, you could understand it better.
Thank you.
So we definitely need to insert something about the background information in the video, if that is possible at the beginning.
Yeah, you're right, Doctor, but I thought that people will be aware of the Zimbardo prison experiment. That's what I put in the...
No problem.
But you're right, I should have mentioned it more clearly.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Any other question, comment?
Just to add a few things. So basically in the experiment, the participants signed a consent. However, it was not clearly explained. So they did not really know, for example, that they're gonna be arrested. And also the prisoner guards were very cruel. They humiliated, they insulted the patient. So the participant had the very stressful emotional circumstances. And some of the participants asked to quit. However, Zimbardo refused. He said that since you signed the consent, no one can decline or withdraw at any point. And basically that's it.
Okay, so any other questions before we move on? Okay, thank you. Rima, please.
Yes, so now we have group 4 with the case of Nancy Olivieri.
Hi, Dr. Arawi. Before we start the video, can I add something? Do you want me to put them a bit into context, or we just start the video?
You need to stick to the limit.
Okay, so we start.
But if you feel it's necessary, but I don't think so, because
I think it's present.
Yeah, okay. I think it sets a story. But if you guys have any questions after the video, we can answer.
An Ode to Nancy Olivieri. 1953 is where it all started, when a baby was born as the hospital charted. Her name was Nancy Olivieri, a doctor is what she ends up to be. She went into medical school and a hematologist is what the world would see. Toronto, Canada is where it's all set, when a drug produced by pharma got tested and was a hidden threat. The drug deferiprone is what came into light, and thalassemia is what they hoped to fight. It's now 89, where Apotex funded the trial. They created what in their opinion was the master vial. The drug was promising, or that's what Apotex thought. Much to their surprise, Olivieri seemed to be more distraught. She realized that the drug was not that efficacious. She started to question herself about what was courageous. To reveal the truth is what she wanted to do, but Apotex shouted, "What? That's your own personal view. A confidentiality agreement is what you signed, so please be silenced because you're in a bind." Olivieri couldn't be quiet anymore. She refused to be silenced. So she revealed the truth to all her patients, even though it got violent. Pharma took notice. With their support, they withdrew. However, Nancy's will and moral courage shone through. Apotex, a Goliath, with Nancy as their David. She fought against the threats that they created. She braved through the way with her findings that she published. That with ethical principles she did more than what she wanted to accomplish. Deferiprone, their prized chelator, was not just inefficient. With findings of liver cirrhosis came out with a high correlation coefficient.
Pharma denied her findings and outrageous testimonies followed suit. Nancy unshaken since she knew she won the dispute. They faked information by using her name. Bringing her down was their primary aim. Yet she rose and refused to be held captive in it, just like our video with no word limit. She encapsulated what a true mentor is in every sense of the word, making an example into a song for researchers which ought to be heard. Integrity and patient safety is what she strived for, not fame nor fortune that others sought out more. Pharma had the upper hand in the hopes of a trial polluted, fabricating and falsifying the results or the agreements they colluded. Conflict of interest with industries owning the data is a common sight. Scientists need to prioritize research integrity against those who spite. Ethics in research is what one stands for. With any misconduct, one must out to explore. Lay people say the goal of research is purely to do with innovation, disregarding wise Hippocrates' pleas of doing no harm to the population. Weighing risk versus benefit before research design is common practice. Let's avoid some violations that the IRB have asked us. Olivieri lost her position for a while but was reinstated. More time and effort into changing unjust policies were allocated. Let's avoid mistakes that end up needing a whistleblower and take time to familiarize ourselves with patient care, even if our trial is slower. Nicole, Jesse, and Ellen, an ode to those who passed away in vain. Let's regain more insight and make our research more humane. An oath we swore and a pledge we will uphold. Let our ode, though lengthy, out to be retold. This is for those who were neglected, the likes of Miss Franklin, the real Nobel Prize winners that they deserve to be ranked in. Our lengthy ode to Nancy has come to an end. This is the story of ethical principles, a legacy we will forever defend.
Thank you very much. It's very well done. Anyone wants to ask anything? Faris? Faris is just applauding, yeah. And then you have someone saying, very nice, very creative, outstanding. Okay, all I'm seeing is claps.
I want to ask a question, Talia.
أكيد غادة.
If I may, this is really nice. I enjoy it thoroughly. Clearly, you have talent exceeding quantitative skills. Let's assume for a moment you, as rising stars and junior colleagues, faced a situation like this. What would be, in your view, the best way to address it? You're not as senior as Nancy Olivieri, but you have all these ingrained principles in research integrity and safeguarding patients' well-being as a priority. So how would you go about it? Any one of you, and all of you actually, I would love to hear from all of you.
Hi,
Yeah,
Dr.
hi.
Oh, wait.
Abdesati. Okay. Hi, Dr. Me or
Hello.
you?
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Farhan. Thank you for your question and thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. So, Doctor, like you said, the main thing that we learned from these courses is the importance of following our ethical principles. So if we had the chance to do the same thing, we will follow our instinct and will prioritize patient safety and the integrity over research over everything else. Now, us as students not being in the position and the influence that Dr. Nancy Olivieri has, we might resort to certain things like in AUB, you told us about the anonymous safety reporting. We could use that. We can always resort to more influential people like our mentors or our doctors or the principal investigator who would have more impact, and if he agrees with us and in case we can prove our point, he would be the one who will travel or give our message to either the pharmaceutical company who's starting this program or any other personal interest.
Great. So you would start with the PI of the trial. And of course, I mean, we always say the first person to ensure research integrity is preserved and well-being of patient is you as an investigator, of course, the PI, and of course, next would be the IRB and your Human Research Protection Program at AUB. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And
do you mind if I have a comment?
Wallo.
Team, sorry to interrupt. Okay, so listen to this. I love this presentation and I say it with full admiration. I see all contents fulfilled and the ethical rules instilled. So happy to see you in flow and in the near future, a proud Sharpie to glow. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you, Doctor. Really, this deserves.
I love it.
Thank you.
هذا ارتجال.
You have hidden talent, Rami. I didn't know that.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, Amjad.
Amjad, and I just want to add one thing to the last comment. And this is something I've always said, and probably you're bored hearing it. Principles without moral courage amount to almost nothing. So thank you. And indeed, Rami, if you can please send it to Rima so that we paste it and you make use of it. Thanks again, and we move on.
So now we have group 5 and the story of Henrietta Lacks.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hi.
Hi. So I came across a very interesting article. Just want to take your opinion about it. So it talks about Henrietta Lacks, who is a 30-year-old African-American woman. She had 5 children. She was diagnosed with an unusually aggressive form of cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1951. Actually, tissue samples were taken during her diagnosis and her treatment, and portions were passed along to researchers without her knowledge or permission. These cells were actually called HeLa cells. So they're based on the initials of her first and last names, and they were grown in a lab indefinitely.
Okay, so they basically took her cells and worked with them without even her saying anything, without an informed consent. It's interesting.
Look, taking her cells without her consent wasn't cool. But why would you consent her if they're working with the cells? Their interaction is with the cells.
What are you saying? I don't understand.
No, I'm saying that consent is needed when we have human interaction, which was missing here. Look, the US common rule defines a human subject as a living individual about whom an investigator obtains A, data through intervention or interaction with the individual, and B, identifiable private information. So under these conditions, research can be determined not to involve human subjects, and hence no informed consent is required.
Okay, first, the common rule doesn't apply here because her information literally had identifiers. They were named HeLa cells, which stands for her name, Henrietta Lacks. And I'm not sure if you know that, but in 2015, there was another federal government issue. It's called something like NPRM, and it changed basically the definition of human subject. It expanded it to include those from which the investigator obtains, uses, or analyzes biospecimens. So people who gave their biospecimens are now considered a human subject. So basically, you need informed consent for all biospecimens now when you're working.
Deal, so I'll consent you next time I'm culturing your cells.
Wait, what? What?
Guys, let me go on. It gets a bit more interesting. So on the 11th of March in 2013, a team of researchers from the European Molecular Biology Lab published online the whole genome sequencing the HeLa cells for the purpose actually to serve as a resource to help other researchers.
Yeah, sure thing. Like, let me share your genetic information. Let me share your lineage genetic information online. Yeah, that sounds great.
But come on, they posted information about cancerous cells that had mutated enormously over the past 60 years. It's very unlikely for people to discover that. Usually identifying the source of a genetic sample from which identifiers have been removed would require intent and technical wherewithal, as well as motivation and a means by which to exploit this information.
Yeah, but clearly this wasn't the case. This is a special case, and her information and her descendants' information were disclosed to the public. And by the way, we still need to talk about you culturing my cells.
Guys, to go on, the authors, they actually wrote the Lacks family a thorough apology. They were apologizing for any distress that the publication may have caused. They removed the sequence of data from the internet, and they established an NIH database of genotypes and phenotypes. All publications that have actually used the data must include a specific acknowledgement of Henrietta Lacks and her family, Although the HeLa cell line was very lucrative, financially resulting in hundreds of millions of revenues, the Lax family themselves never received any financial benefit from the HeLa line, although they actually lived in poverty and were unable to pay for their own medical care.
Why not? Like, pay them up. Like, Henrietta Cells made all that money, practically speaking.
I'm not sure this will work though. I understand to compensate patients for effort and burden when doing an intervention to take their tissues. But when there are residual clinical tissue that were going to be discarded, why would I pay them?
Whatever, man. Like, they're living in poverty. Pay them like anything, I guess.
Well, with the millions of revenue, small payments can be regarded as unfair. Also, if we were to start paying for tissues, this might paradoxically have a negative effect on patients' willingness to give their tissues for research. And also, this could act as a barrier, making research so much more expensive. And then, why would we pay the descendants?
Okay. I don't know. I really don't know, but I understand that you will not be paying for my cells. Anyway, man, like, this story gives a lot of other things to discuss. We can talk about the role of public opinion in policy development. We can talk about the role of paying for descendants and not the actual cells from which the person was obtained. There are a lot of things to discuss.
Yeah, I know, but maybe we can discuss this later on at another time. I have a surgery I have to get run off to, guys. Just wanted to get your opinion on this issue. See you later,
Okay.
guys.
See you.
Well, these are the references that we use for this video. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions, comments?
Just a quick comment. So basically, the gist of the video is we were trying to display the story of Henrietta Lacks in a way or form that we as scientists we assume that the scientists that had these mistakes, we're not evil. They didn't do it on purpose. So that's why there was a devil's advocate in a way or a form. And then there was the ethical issues that were raised during this issue of where her information was taken without her consent, etc., and whatnot. So that's why we had these two opinions going on, left and right, because we assumed that the scientists that did these things, given that eventually they did confess, or they wrote an apology to the family and whatnot. So this is why we went around it in this way. So it was like a devil's advocate versus the true ethical dilemma and being raised.
Great, thank you. Thank you for clearing this out. Comment from my colleagues? Questions?
Thank you. That was really nice sort of discussion of all the important points. So perhaps you can elaborate on the issue of non-human subject research. So is it ever possible to completely de-identify biological specimens? What do you think?
I personally don't believe so. If we are posting their genomes online, or even in a study within an institute, if we have any type of genome or PCR testing or whatnot, I don't think we can de-identify this information. So we have to be very careful with sharing it or posting it. We have to do it in an ethical manner, ethical way or form. And if we were to post it, we have to have the full consent of the patient, and the patient has to understand that this information will be, no matter how cancerous this disease is or how it changes with time, there will be still some sequences that are specific to this person, the individual, and his line.
We also have the issue of patients who've passed away, because for the rules, that becomes non-human subject research. But do you think there's an ethical obligation to their descendants if we are using germline information for research?
Yes, I do believe so, because even if it is this specific person's genetic information, but it does have information regarding his or her offspring's mother, father, brother, sister, etc., etc.
It gets very complicated, as Dr. Mahfouz can tell us, as technology advances. Things get much more complicated, and perhaps an informed consent from 10 years ago would no longer be valid with the technology today. It's a difficult thing to think about.
Yes, I agree, though.
So that's a very important point. Thank you, Debbie, for raising it. Now, globally, there is a global group, if you want, that is actually revising the requirements for an informed consent and for a research protocol when it comes to any genomic research or any research related to genomics, because as you clearly said, it doesn't end with the participant, him or herself. Once we have something final, I will definitely update Rima. I'm sure she will send an email to everyone, to all our dear Sharpies. Someone else wants to add anything or raise a question? Rami, would you want to add something on this issue, since you are the expert?
No, thank you very much. But as Debbie mentioned, yes, the price of technology that we are paying today is not only for diagnostic purposes, but it's knocking the doors at multiple levels. The most important are the ethical considerations as well. And the team has really pointed out to many aspects in this regard. So it's just another piece of good work. Thank you.
So just like one of you said earlier on, not everything we can do, we should do. And that's the most important thing maybe we need to take away with us. Thank you. The next group, please, Rima. Super, yes. Rima.
Now we have group 6 and research and mental health.
وسهلا جميعا. عم بحكيكم لايف من UPMC. عندي خبر محزن، خبر بيوجع القلب. الأدوية بطل في منها بلبنان، أدوية الأعصاب خلصت والعالم عم تنهار. الحل عندي فنادول لمعالجة الاكتئاب. هي دراسة صار لي سنين عم بعمل خلطتها وهلأ صار وقت نجربها.
So, hi doctor كيفك؟ I'm having low mood هالفترة بتعرفي؟
أنا بعرف شو معك. انت obviously متفرسه سو جربي لي هيدا الدواء ورح تشكريني.
اكيد انت انه دغري ببلش بدواء؟
انت رح تكون جزء من دراسه نحن رح نعملها to try this medication. اوكي
هيك دغري مجبوره.
الضمير
دكتوره take the time to diagnose the patient. Misdiagnosing for the sake of research has detrimental psychological effects on the patient. Repeat encounter.
مليانه بيز على الاسئله اللي سالتك اياها تبين انه عندك تشخيص الاكتئاب، فهلا رح اعطيكي هيدا الدواء رح تبلشي فيه، وهيدا جزء من دراسه نحن عم نعملها لنشوف اذا هيدا الدواء افكتيف بهيدا الحاله.
انت اكيده؟
ماريانا بفتكر السنين اللي قضيناها سوا ترزم انه انت تقبلي بهذا الشيء. انت مثل بنتك، يعني علاقتنا صارت كثير قويه معك. صوت الضمير.
دكتوره this is coercion. Psychiatrist-patient relationship is subject to transference and counter-transference due to the emotion involved during the session. You have to be as neutral as possible and non-coercive. Repeat encounter.
اوكي، فهيدا الدراسه رح تكون انه نعطي هيدا الدواء لإلك ولكثير اشخاص مثلك. هيدا الدواء بفرجي يكون في فايده لإلهم على المدى القصير وعلى المدى البعيد.
واو، لكن اكيد باخذه اذا هيك.
اوكي ديفينتلي رح تستفيدي من هيدا الشيء وما رح تنضري ابدا. صوت الضمير.
دكتوره in the informed consent you need to describe the study very clearly and state clearly the benefits and the risks of the drug in use. Also keep in mind autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence and justice for the patient. Repeat encounter.
مثلا عوارض جانبيه، ممكن يكون في allergic reaction يعني ردات فعل، ممكن يكون في عوارض جهاز هضمي، اسهال، استفراغ.
صراحه
هل ممكن انه تفكري انه ما تفوتي على الاستدي؟
صراحة آخر هم يعني إذا بفوت أو لا، إنه هيك لحن مش بتفرق إذا بيطول لي شوية حياتي يعني أو بيقصرها شوي صراحة.
Anyways, as long as قلت إيه رح أعطيك.
Dora, psychiatric patients are vulnerable for the reasons mentioned before. You need to assess the patient to see if they have decision-making capacity before enrolling them in the study. Clearly, this patient is anhedonic and you cannot obtain consent from her. Repeat encounter.
Thank you. ألو، مش الحال. ماريانا اللي خبرتك عن بتعرفها؟ وين؟ 100% هاي البلوك اللي قدام اللي عايشة. صوت الضمير.
Dora, since there is a huge stigma on mental health diseases, it might influence patients to not want to participate in studies. Confidentiality is very important and researchers should be trained for it and train their team to respect confidentiality in this vulnerable population. Repeat encounter.
صغير هيك أنا بدي أنتحر صراحة.
ماريانا أنا عندي الحل لك.
ما عندك شيء.
هيدا الدواء
ما فيك تحلي لها مشاكل بدواء.
هيدا الدواء رح تشكينا عليه. You take it now. هيدا جزء من الستادي اللي عملناها نحن. اوكي.
شو هو هيدا الدواء؟ في له اسم، قولي لي شو اسمه.
هيدا الدواء إذا ماجيكال دراج لأنه رح يحل
I
لك
don't
مشكلتك
believe in
من
magic. ما في
أساسها.
شيء بيحل لها مشاكل.
اوكي، شو رح تخسر؟ فيك تجربي وما بتقولي
رح أجربه مرة واحدة. بكرة إذا ما بكون واعية أحسن رح أنتحر.
إيه مثل ما عم خبرك. لا إيه مثل ما عم خبرك مش الحال. عطينا البلاسيبو. صوت الضمير.
Doctora, there is concerns in selecting inactive placebo in non-pharmacological modes of treatment. Placebo-controlled studies need to be considered over uncontrolled studies for sure, but in severe cases, due to worsening of placebo-induced symptoms, a new psychoactive medication or antidepressant should be studied against an active component.
Thank you. I love the new Jiminy Cricket. I think it's a B if I'm not mistaken. So any questions from my colleagues? I wish this bee stings everyone in this world.
Yeah, I think it's a great presentation. I just have one minor comment on the AV production. While the Sawt al-Damir was loud and clear, the other conversation was a bit more muted and there was a big contrast between the two. So always listen to your videos and try to optimize that. But really nice, very current and very interactive way of conveying the message. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghada. Anyone else?
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. We move on.
Yes, we have now group 7 and Milgram's experiment.
Welcome back to our late show, Ethical Dilemmas. Tonight we have a special guest, Mr. Johnny, who took part in Milgram's experiment 60 years ago. So Mr. Johnny, first of all, I would like to apologize for reminding you of this event, but can you please comment on this experience?
First of all, thank you for having me. Yeah, it was 60 years ago. I can recall the events as if it happened yesterday. I was walking past Yale University campus and I saw a pamphlet that was held up on the wall. They were offering $5 for the experiment, and I thought to myself that it was easy money. So I signed up right away and I showed up first thing in the morning. So I went down to Milgram's lab where I was welcomed by a scientist, and she seemed very professional. She explained that the study was about science and it's going to benefit everyone. And she made us draw a paper to assign us the role of either the student or a teacher. And little did I know that we had 0% chance of becoming the students, and we always were the teachers. And we were so naive during the 60s.
Thank you, Mr. Johnny, for your story. And now I would like to welcome Dr. Theodore Armstrong, our clinical bioethics consultant and clinical bioethicist straight from Yale University. Dr. Armstrong, would you like to comment on Johnny's story?
First, let's not forget the objective of the experiment, which was not revealed to the participants. And it was actually to demonstrate how far people are willing to obey authority figures in committing atrocities, such as what happened in the Second World War. From the start, we can notice that the experiment design was flawed. The participants in Milgram's study were all male, which is not generalizable to the US population. Also, as Johnny just said, participants were misled into thinking their role was randomly drawn, while in fact, they were all to be teachers.
Yes, exactly, Dr. Armstrong. And on top of that, the scientist told me to deliver electric shocks each time the student, whom I could only hear, answered my questions incorrectly. And I had to increase the voltage each time they had an incorrect answer.
Please increase to 250.
250? What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires you to continue.
But I don't want to hurt the man in there. Who's gonna take responsibility if something happens to him?
I'm fully responsible if anything happens. Please continue.
So I've been reading some reports, Mr. Johnny, and I read that 65% of the participants reached a maximal voltage of 450. Were you one of them?
The whole experience was very stressful, with all the screaming and electrocutions. I just couldn't stop. I was just following orders. I didn't mean to hurt anyone.
I'm sorry you had to go through this, Johnny. In fact, no one was actually electrocuted, and participants were deceived as the students were in on it, and the screams were actually recordings. We can see here a clear violation of the Nuremberg Code that was founded in 1948. Participants were exposed to extremely stressful situations that can cause psychological harm. Many of the participants were visibly distressed. However, protection of the participants wasn't taken into consideration. Finally, the human participant should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end at any time. The right to withdrawal was clearly violated.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong, and thank you, Mr. Johnny, for joining us tonight. And so, a substantial proportion of people do what they're told to do, irrespective of the content of their act and without limitations, as long as they perceive that the command is coming from a legitimate authority. So despite this important conclusion drawn from Milgram's experiment, do the ends really justify the means? This is food for thought for next week's episode with Ethical Dilemmas.
Thank you very much. Can we keep the video going always?
Walking down...
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Johnny, for this heartwarming ethicist and clinical bioethicist consultant. Our clinical bioethicist. And clinical bioethics consultant. Bioethics consultant.
We had this.
Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. I wish this TV series of yours will continue all through, not just in Sharp. Any questions from my colleagues? None?
Very nice. I'm trying to think of a question. It was quite clear. Perhaps the team can tell us their opinion about how we can prevent anything like that happening again. So what are the safeguards for human subjects that prevent this happening again?
Thank you, Doctor. So first, as we said in the video, that during the consent form, the participants should, everything should be clear about the goal of the study and what's happening during the study. Second, it should be taken into consideration that no harm should be done to the participants, either physical or psychological, as we hinted through this video. And also, when the participants wanted to withdraw from the study, they had all the right to withdraw at any point in time. So I wanted to point out also that this experiment was repeated and they had different situations. For example, for the experimenter, when they didn't use a white coat, the obedience level dropped. When they changed the location from the Yale University, which is very a renowned institution, also the obedience dropped. When there was another assistant who should push the button, also the obedience level changed. So this experiment showed it had impressive results, but on an ethical basis, it was very,
Thank you very much. I personally am really enjoying these presentations. Anyone else wants to say anything, or shall we move on?
Let's move on, Talia.
Yeah.
Okay, so group 8 and our placebo-controlled trials in patients with COVID-19 ethical.
Hello all, my name is Antoine Bijani. My colleagues Raz Zaitoun and Abdulrahman Akawi and I have prepared a short video where we try to tackle the following topic: our placebo-controlled trials in patients with COVID-19 ethical. I do believe that the ethical concerns and dilemma that can be raised by this question cannot be all addressed in this video, but perhaps a few key points can be discussed. I think the concept of having a placebo group within a trial should be divided into two parts: placebo use in the absence of existing proven therapy, and placebo use even if proven therapy is available. Regarding the second part of this statement, it is important to understand where it is derived from. In the context of study in sub-Saharan Africa and Thailand on the prevention of HIV transmission from mothers to unborn children, the most famous of which being zidovudine, they were tested against placebo, although a costly standard therapy was available in wealthier countries such as the United States and France that were sponsoring themselves those studies. They argued that in poor regions, the risk-benefit ratio of participation in these studies would be no worse than that of non-participation. This issue led to the modification and revision of the Declaration of Helsinki to say, if a standard therapy is available, trials with a placebo may proceed only for compelling scientific reasons and with very low risk involved. This ethical problem, however, of potentially making use of the vulnerability of some poorer countries, be it by paying them to join the study or offering treatment options in places where resources are scarce, is of utmost importance during the COVID-19 pandemic. Placebo-controlled trials do not only apply to drugs and treatment, but also run currently in studies involving newer COVID-19 vaccines. The WHO recently stated that countries with limited or no access to a known effective vaccine could thus ethically permit placebo-controlled trials of vaccines of potential relevance to them, even if effective vaccines were already being marketed elsewhere. This deviates from the requirements of the Declaration of Helsinki and the CIOMS guidelines that came about as a result of significant pressure from poorer countries that saw potential abuse and exploitation in those studies, while patients in rich countries may stand to benefit the most.
Hello, my name is Raj Zaitoun, and for the next part of this video, I will be discussing the case of hydroxychloroquine and the ethical issues associated with its study and use. I'm sure you all remember the initial enthusiasm for hydroxychloroquine and its promising therapeutic benefits in treating COVID-19. This was based on very limited data and weak evidence. Nevertheless, the media and prominent public figures such as former President Trump spoke very frequently of the drug, which amplified a therapeutic misconception that found its way among healthcare workers as well. Subsequently, many RCTs arose to study the supposedly wonder drug, which raised some ethical issues. First of all, in a time when financial and human resources are limited, such as during a pandemic, Is it ethical to allow for such a huge number of duplicative trials? As of May 2020, there were 117 registered trials studying the use of this drug. Second of all, early in the pandemic, some might have argued that a placebo-controlled hydroxychloroquine trial where controlled subjects received symptomatic treatment only was not problematic, since there was no established standard of care at the time. Another ethical issue arises here. Hydroxychloroquine has been previously studied, approved, and marketed for lupus, malaria, and rheumatoid arthritis, and it has a well-defined safety profile. The same applies for trials that studied remdesivir, a molecule that has been originally studied in hepatitis C, RSV, and Ebola, and was shown to be safe. Is it ethical to deprive patients from a safe drug with potential therapeutic benefits, even if these benefits had not been proven yet?
My name is Abdulrahman Akkawi, and in this part of the video, I will be discussing the ethical issue regarding the continuation of randomized clinical trials on COVID patients when there is an effective intervention such as the vaccine. Whenever there are effective and safe therapeutic or prophylactic interventions for COVID-19 patients or other patients, the use of placebos instead of active intervention in the randomized clinical trials remains a delicate ethical dilemma. When doctors and the clinical investigators randomly assign patients to receive placebos when an effective therapeutic or prophylactic intervention exists, they by that break their professional commitment and the Hippocratic Oath that states that the health of my patient will be my first consideration. This principle states that physicians and researchers must be in a state of genuine uncertainty about the relative merits such as efficacy and safety of the alternative intervention being tested. The International Codes of Medical Ethics explicitly states that inactive or no intervention are acceptable only in the following three scenarios. 1. No proven intervention exists yet. Second, there are convincing and methodological reasons for using placebo. Third, not to treat does not imply any risk or harm on the patient or the participant. With some vaccines proven to be effective, subsequent placebo randomized clinical trials and follow-up studies possess ethical dilemmas for the researchers and the physicians. On November 2020, the European Medical Agency, the EMA, advised COVID-19 vaccine investigators that the trials for follow-up should continue beyond the time when the predefined cases of COVID-19 for final analysis has been established and reached, to provide more precise information on the long-term and safety of the vaccine. The core ethical value strongly recommends that participants who had received placebo in COVID-19 vaccines trial should be promptly vaccinated after short-term analysis has proven that the vaccines are effective and safe, even though this may jeopardize the study follow-up for long-term efficacy and safety. On the long run, and to be more ethical, further randomized trials must assign participants to active control arms that contains the vaccines that already have been studied, not to the placebo control arms.
Thank you very much. I'm on purpose trying not to intervene here, so I'm going to keep the floor open for my colleagues. And then we still have one more presentation to go.
Thank you for a nice discussion. A question about whether you think that the research ethics in a global pandemic should be any different, or what are those different considerations? Are there different considerations, or should everything be the same?
It's a very delicate situation, actually, because when you're in a pandemic, what you want to try to achieve is benefit for all people. So sometimes it seems that we can bypass some of the ethical principles and laws. It seems that this is what people would try to do. For example, talking about the newer COVID vaccine, and I'm sorry, Dr. Arawi, I know the topic was patients with COVID-19, but the topic now is even is more actual when we talk about the vaccine, since we have effective vaccine and yet newer vaccines being tested in Africa. It is, and really it breaks the principle of justice of serving all the people in an equal and fair way, and not providing African countries with the vaccine. We also think that, yeah, we need to study the vaccine on different populations, not just on the like those people with drugs and alternatives. And another thing that one would consider is that even those people who are taking the vaccine compared to the other people who are taking placebo might not end up benefiting and might just be exposing themselves to like negative outcomes one may not know. But yeah, I do think that some steps, some ethical principles are bypassed during a pandemic, and there should be a more generalized approach and like agreement to be able to tackle it.
Thank you, Antoine. And I'd like to draw your attention to a link that was missed, that was shared by Dr. Fleihan.
Thank you, Talia. Can I just make a quick comment related to that? So the AMA had a lot of heated debates back and forth and modifying their stance on placebo-controlled trial. What I wanted to highlight here is the pull and the tension with the FDA requirements for placebo-controlled trial. And if not, the other option would be a non-inferiority trial, which, as you may foresee, is problematic for a pharmaceutical company. Can anybody take a second guess why placebo-controlled trial is more convenient for pharma than a non-inferiority trial? Comparing to, established vaccine, for example?
Because it's much cheaper.
Why is it cheaper?
Placebo, I guess, is could be anything compared to the vaccine.
No, that's not the cost of the meds. You're on the right track, but not the right reason. So to make a long story short, the power of a trial is related to the baseline event rates. And event rates, if you're already taking vaccine in both arms, is going to be much lower. It's going to be very difficult to either show superiority of your new vaccine or non-inferiority of your new vaccine. So you will have to hire a much larger number of subjects to be able to show what you want to show based on power analyses. So this is the tension. This is why placebo-controlled trials are liked by most people, pharma on their side, and the FDA wants unequivocal evidence of efficacy. And so the way out for the FDA is to suggest non-inferiority trial, but from pharma standpoint, this is not ideal. So these are some of the back and forth discussions going on. The other thing which doesn't apply to vaccine, but applies to major outcomes is the cost of big trials with major outcomes. The duration are so taxing that the FDA is currently envisioning, at least for the bone events, surrogate markers as the option to contain cost in the face of the economic situation. But these are just kind of peripheral. I think the ethical implication here with the economic tension is what's driving the equation.
Thank you, Ghada. I would like also to highlight one more thing, that although there are universal regulations when it comes to ethics, and I think you've heard me saying this in the presentations and elsewhere, it is always important for us to keep an open mind and to see if there are situations that will call that we look again at the principles as they are. In other words, there are no sacred cows, as we say, and at times a morally courageous, responsible researcher will have to challenge certain general regulations. And actually, this is how paradigm shifts occur. Thank you. Last group, last but not least. Antoine, do you want to say anything?
I agree with you, Doctor. Exactly. Like big events are the ones that trigger changes in the laws of ethics, like the declaration, like the Nuremberg Code, and then the Declaration of Helsinki. So yeah, it's always important to review them and maybe adjust.
Absolutely. So there are core principles, definitely, that we need to respect, but at the periphery that changes over time and in different places, we need to keep an eye open on these different particulars, as we say. And culture, again, when it is important, that's why there's an issue with international research, but that's another story. So basically, yes, that is, again, to be respectful of time, we need to move, and nice presentation, Akid. We need to move to the last presentation.
Doctor, can I say something?
أكيد أكيد.
I have a question, Dr. Fleihan, regarding the placebo-controlled trials. So the thing is that we just need to increase the power in order to account for the RCT compared to placebo, right?
No, what I meant is if you're not using a placebo, you have to increase the sample size because the event rates are lower. So the sample size increase is, well, let me backtrack for a moment. Putting ethics a bit on the side, but if you have a placebo-controlled trial and you want to make it feasible despite the availability of an alternate, the only way you'll make it acceptable is, for example, by either taking a lower risk population, that is people not affected, or people low risk of complication if you give them a placebo. But if you want to really be ethical in a high risk population, you have to give the best alternative approved therapy. If you give the best alternative approved therapy, it would cost you much more money as a pharma because the event rates difference between the two arms is going to be smaller. So your sample size is going to be bigger. This is what I meant. The other instance
like
where you
Pfizer against a new vaccine.
But Pfizer against, when Moderna was coming shortly after, or something that's going to come out now. Exactly. So either you choose a population that's lower risk, or you choose a duration that's much shorter, or if it's a high risk, you have to bite the bullet and use the best alternative therapy, which will make it much more costly.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so group 9 and expanded access and access to vaccination for COVID-19.
Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of The Sharpest News, where we dissect the hottest topics and bring your concerns to rest. November 1st, 2020. Hundreds of thousands of occupied ICU beds, overflowing EDs, and a healthcare system on the brink of explosion. November 9th, the first data of COVID vaccine efficacy is released, giving humanity the first breath of relief after a long haul of an unrelenting pandemic. But to this day, many ethical questions are still not addressed. For tonight's episode on The Sharpest News, we will be hosting the internationally acclaimed bioethicist, Dr. Kovana Bionicum.
Hello, everybody.
And Worldwide Authority, IRB representative, Dr. Ethika Consenta.
Hello, everyone.
To address the issues of ethics in COVID vaccine research. And I, Sharpezi Pandemia, will be your host for the night. To begin with you, Dr. Kovana, these vaccines are released on an EUA. What does that mean exactly?
Well, this is a mechanism to facilitate the availability and the use of medical countermeasures during an emergency such as the COVID-19 pandemic, Sharpezi.
So it has received FDA approval, of course?
No. This is the main concern, that we are providing vaccines to almost all the population, knowing that it didn't receive the FDA approval yet.
Ethika, it is clear that the potential benefits of this vaccine outweigh the non and potential risks, right?
Well, but have you ever heard about the clotting side effects of Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca's vaccine?
Yeah, of course.
There is no doubt the political and public pressure to produce data is immense. Are ethical standards still being respected in these trials?
Institutional ethical committees are finding difficulties in balancing the high number of the clinical trials in a timely manner.
Well, some ethics of research are being violated. For example, the co-enrollment of participants in multiple trials and acceptance of multiple payments for participation violates ethics in research, right?
See, smart devices are being increasingly used for recruitment and follow-up. Does this hinder equity among the less privileged?
This reminds me of the Belmont principle of
remember, Ethika, smart devices are increasingly being used to recruit subjects, right?
Well, these devices are often not affordable nor understandable by a significant number of people from low middle income countries. And informed consent is also compromised there. Also, those people have had negative experience in the past with clinical trials, which actually prevents further participation, right?
I see. Does this extend to trial monitoring and reporting? One might also ask, are adequate means provided in the event of an adverse outcome?
Well, it's a big ethical concern here.
So let's suppose I'm on the placebo arm of one of these clinical trials that are double-blinded. Will my PI inform me about the release of the competing efficacious vaccine and risk the integrity of his trial?
When sponsors submit the vaccine efficacy report, the Institutional Ethics Committee and the PI should address the anxiety of the placebo participants.
Yeah, got it, Ethika. Got it.
I don't think so. Cheers.
Okay, and in that scenario where I have helped pave the way to success for that study, am I given privilege once it is authorized and released?
Well, let me tell you, we have a moral obligation to benefit those who benefited us, and now is no exception.
Do pharma companies have any conflict of interest, perhaps?
Well, Kavana can answer the question. She's good at it.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer it. Well, yeah, true. These companies have moral obligations to ensure that their products are distributed in line with the needs and not relying solely on the political and economic motives. For example, let me give you an example of AstraZeneca. It pledged to sell their vaccine on a not-for-profit basis in developing countries, showing the company's active efforts in trying to close the accessibility gap.
So when companies cannot solve an issue that affects more than half of the globe, AstraZeneca's contribution would only provide enough vaccines for 18% of the population at most.
And it is evident that the access and distribution is also far from equitable, right? And what are the ethical repercussions of a national vaccination scheme that is adopted by many today?
Yes, unethical practices will continue and continue.
Mom, what about me? Oh, allow me for one more question. A big heading in research ethics is the protection of vulnerable populations. Where do they stand today? What do we tell a pregnant female that is hoping to protect her unborn child? Who bears the responsibilities of the decision?
Unfortunately, until now, there's no enough clinical evidence on the adverse effects of vaccines on vulnerable groups.
Well, I hope no violations would occur and researcher will adhere to the Belmont principles and the
No violations will occur, Ethika, don't worry, no violations.
Okay, ladies, thank you very much and thank you for watching.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you, love the news station. Colleagues? You know, when there's silence, it's a good sign.
Yeah, very nice. Trying to think of challenging questions.
I think they all managed, despite the virtual presentation, to reflect the current situation. Some of them, you know, making use of a Zoom-like interaction, which I really love. And I think they've managed to be as creative as possible. And it's been always a joy, as Dr. Arawi and my colleagues know, to watch these videos, to see all the concepts you know, crystallized in very attractive and very meaningful presentation in such a short time. So I personally have no comments. My only one is always review your soundtrack, the way it comes through before you send it to Rima. That's the only comment I have on FEW presentation, but it was outstanding and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And we've even showcased these at graduation, and we'll continue that legacy as led by Dr. Arawi and my colleagues here.
Thank you, Ghada. Well, I'm not going to say more than you just did. It's really beautiful and intellectually pleasing to watch all this. And again, as Dr. Fleihan said, you managed superb work in a very short time. So chapeau bas. And I can read the congratulations about the presentations on the chat. Without further ado, I think I'm going to kindly ask you, with the permission of Dr. Ghada and Rima, to open your videos so that we see you and so that we all take the oath together. Nice to see human faces. Hey.
Hello, everybody.
You all, I'm assuming, have seen the copy of the pledge on Moodle?
Yeah.
Great. I need to do the same, right? Okay. Nice. All right. So, Rima, when everyone is on video, can you tell me we can start reading the pledge?
We can start.
We can start. Okay. So the idea is for me to read statement after statement and for you to repeat after me, please. And by the way, this pledge was actually written, or let's say co-written initially by Sharpies, and then Dr. Ghada, myself, and some colleagues also did some edits and changed it. And it's one of the leading scientist pledges all over, actually. So today, as I enter the lifelong quest for knowledge, as a devoted member of the community of scientists, I pledge to work for a better world where science and technology are used responsibly.
Work for a better world where science and technology are used responsibly.
Consider the ethical repercussions of my work before I embark on it.
Consider the ethical repercussions of my work before I embark on it.
Be truthful, fair, and as open as possible in any research I undertake.
Be truthful, fair, and as open as possible in any research I undertake.
Use and produce knowledge only to serve the good of humanity and the preservation of the environment, respecting all forms of human and animal life and protecting them against harm.
Use and produce knowledge only to serve preservation of the environment, protecting all forms of human and animal life and protecting them against harm.
Ensure that the autonomy and dignity of research participants be honored and respected, and that whatever information I gather from research participants will be handled responsibly and with the utmost confidentiality.
Ensure the autonomy and dignity of research participants honored and respected.
Whatever information I gather from research participants will be handled responsibly and with the utmost confidentiality.
Handle information with intellectual honesty and refrain from plagiarism, fabrication, or falsification of data.
Handle information with intellectual honesty and refrain from plagiarism, fabrication, or falsification of data.
Remain uninfluenced by material advantages, political or national loyalties in all teaching, research, and scholarship.
Remain uninfluenced by material advantages, political or national teaching, research, and scholarship.
Honor and recognize the contributions of previous and present scholars.
Honor and recognize the contributions of
previous
and
present scholars.
Endeavor to reverse any development stemming from my work should it be used to the detriment of humans, animals, or the environment,
Endeavor to reverse the development from my work should it be used to the detriment of humans, animals, or the environment.
Strive to be a worthy role model and mentor for those who follow by showing integrity, ethical practice, and compassion.
Strive to be a worthy role model and mentor for those who follow by showing integrity, ethical practice, and compassion.
Individual responsibility for all ethical aspects of my research, and in so doing, maintain respect for the value and dignity of life and the environment, safeguarding our heritage for future generations.
Take individual responsibility for all ethical aspects of my research, so maintain respect for the value and dignity of the environment, safeguarding our heritage for future generations.
Okay, so I hereby make this pledge, recognizing that individual responsibility, accountability, and clarity of conscience are the first steps to worthy and responsible research. By pronouncing the pledge, I commit to the principles of professionalism, honesty, duty, and integrity. I take responsibility in front of the scientific community if I breach my pledge and compromise my dedications to sound ethical practices. All you need to say here is, I do.
I do.
Okay. Congratulations again, and welcome to the community of ethical scientists and researchers. I'd like to add one more thing, Ahleen. I'd like to add one more thing, which is very important for me, which is that all the team that is working with you in the SHARP ethics course actually are role models that uphold exactly these principles. So we are not just talking the talk, we are walking the talk. And thank you, everyone. I leave the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Talia. This is amazing. Every year we're lifted by these wonderful series of videos. I hope we will have the opportunity of having an on-site, a face-to-face graduation this year. We will showcase some of those. Hopefully all of you are or will be soon vaccinated, and we will get special permission for that, but it's time to really get to know each other. Virtual is kind of alienating because we don't get to know you as well. It's nice to see you animated in front of these screens, presenting your view of the concepts that have been shared with you. And I really want to thank everybody. I want to thank Dr. Arawi. She does it every year. I don't know how you do it in 10, 12 days. You do it every year. Dr. Mahfoud and Dr. Debra for engaging so actively with popular IRB, mock session and all the other additional stuff. So really very, very heartwarming, as I put it. And this year, Rami managed to make it even more heartwarming with his poem. So thank you.
Thank you, Ghada.
Thank you very much. مبروك.
ما في شعر رامي؟
ما عم يطلع معي شيء هلا.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mukherjee, do you want to add anything?
Congratulations for your hard work, and enjoy the rest of the course.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Rima, thanks again. You even are under the weather, as we say, and you never miss to be with us and do everything for us. So thanks a lot. God bless you. And inshallah, see you in graduation.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Mabruk. Thank you.
Thank you, doctors.
Hala, thank you. Mabruk.